We're back again, and we're joined by the UNDP Pakistan's resident representative, Mr. Samuel Rizk. UNDP has been working quite closely in Pakistan, particularly building resilience in vulnerable communities, such as the northern areas, the glacial belt of Pakistan, and also contributing quite closely to the flood recovery efforts. Today, during the conference, the focus was on climate justice and ideas around adaptive capacity. And I think that's where we want your comments on. Number one, welcome to the conference, and also welcome to this conversation. So, given UNDP's work with Pakistan quite closely with the federal ministries as well and the provincial governments, what do you think in the next 5 to 10 years, in the medium term, what are the goals that UNDP wants to see Pakistan achieve and is assisting the government with?
No, thank you very much for the invitation to join. Congratulations to DawnMedia for an impressive conference, international conference on climate change. It is important that as part of the discussion on climate change, and I think we heard this already in the first half day, that climate change is everyone's business, is everyone's problem. It's today's problem, it's tomorrow's problem, and it's very urgent. Just concluded a session on climate justice. And clearly, the urgency around designated the impacts of climate change as undermining human rights is really quite critical. We see that now in the Constitution. We see that in several laws, environmentally speaking, etc. We see that in climate finance currently and for the future. I think that's really quite important. So there's the bigger picture on climate change, which I think everyone knows that quite well. Pakistan doesn't emit much, impacted significantly, and then we heard a little bit more about the climate finance issue. Delay in climate finance is not only a policy failure, but it is a fundamental injustice. These are the words of Justice Mansour Ali Shah. That's really quite critical. Secondly, and I'm getting to the part on the projects, what is important, what is critical. Secondly, anyone who is waiting for international climate finance, we see a number of disappointments lately. We appreciate the funding that comes, often it's long and delayed, etc., but it is really quite important. So finding local solutions are critical. Finance Minister just said that in order for us to be bankable as a country in Pakistan for climate finance, we need bankable projects for that. And the role of the private sector is invaluable. It is critical. It is green, it is sustainable, it's innovative, it's ahead of the curve, and that I think is really quite important. And here's where I come to where some of the issues that we are dealing with and have been dealing with alongside the government and civil society and local communities are. One of our flagship programs here is the Glacial Lake Outburst Flood program. We are now in the second phase of it. It's been running now for about 6 or 7 years. And it is easy to see the pictures and read the text in a report. It is much, much more impressive to actually visit North Pakistan. You go to places in GB, you go to places in KP, Chitral, Hunza, etc. And you see, first of all, this amazing landscape, an amazing array of natural resources, where people live, coexisting with nature for quite a long time. And at the same time, you see in single events a devastation of apocalyptic size. I was astounded to see that after multiple glacial lake outburst floods, that some of the rocks and the boulders that are coming down the mountains are as big as a house. Yeah. There is nothing that will stand in that way. This is not only water melting. There's mud that's sliding, there's water of great velocity plus all of the boulders. And that, I think, is the crux of the matter. The northern part of Pakistan is heavily endowed, significantly endowed with nature's riches, and at the same time very, very vulnerable. Communities in the north are not waiting for handouts, they're not waiting for little support. What we are able to do alongside local governments, provincial governments, local communities, is being able to offer them an opportunity to help themselves and to be more resilient. And I think that's what's critical. I can tell you simply what is the difference between a project that has been supporting communities to be resilient to GLOFs and not. In 2024 in August, in a span of one weekend, so 2 or 3 days, there were 6 GLOF events that happened around Chitral. In 2 of these locations, we had our GLOF project, which is supported by one of the vertical funds, the Green Climate Fund, GCF, which we really appreciate. 2 of these projects were already supported by GLOF to recover from a previous GLOF event, and the 4 others were not. The 2 that were supported were able to recover very quickly. And because we had a project there already set up, we were able to figure out exactly what the damage was. Everybody talks about billions and billions of dollars of loss and damage, but if you think about a local community's actual damage, in one place $2,000, in another place $7,000. This is not very much money if you have the infrastructure of resilience, of individuals being resilient, of the institution being able to respond very quickly, and the local community basically figuring out what needs to be done. GLOFs themselves, and we talk a lot about nature-based solutions. We learn quite a lot from these programs that actually happen in the north. We learn about nature-based solutions, things I'd never heard before, glacial grafting, slope stabilization. All of these things are really quite critical. And I'm afraid that the questions that relate to disasters, natural disasters, climate-related events will happen more frequently. It is no longer a matter of if, it's a matter of when. So you can imagine Pakistan being a country heavily impacted by a flood, a drought, maybe an earthquake. Finance minister said 14 months ago. Add to that macroeconomic challenges. Add to that, in many cases, security problems. Add to that, a transition in government. This is what the poly-crisis now looks like. So looking at climate change from only a climate or environment lens doesn't make sense anymore. It's a multidimensional problem that requires a multidimensional solution.
So follow-up question to that. I think you've already touched on the idea that these things are going to be the norm. These things are not going to be the anomaly. And we saw how during the super floods of 2022, you had the combination of monsoon rains and glacial lake outburst floods happening at the same time, maybe in different areas, but it was all the burden was on the rivers, and it's next to impossible to really do something about it. So we have a clear example of how communities can adapt and then succeed with those adaptive mechanisms. What are the key areas or the top priority areas for adaptation that you think that as UNDP or at the UN level that Pakistan should be really focusing on? What are the sectors and the key maybe regions as well that you see are the most sensitive and should be prioritized?
So I think there are a number of sectors that we have, first of all, prioritized, given much more urgency, of course, around the flood. When this level of devastation happens, I think a lot of people were thinking of shelter, housing, and livelihoods as well. And I think this is an important point to make. $30 billion worth of loss and damage. There was a needs assessment that was done, a recovery framework that was done, a pledging conference in January 2023 that pledged about $12 billion. Much of which remain loans, and a little bit of that in grants. And the money is coming forward, not as fast as everyone would say it needed to come, and not all pledges fulfilled as well. So I think it's important to think of the solidarity of the international community with Pakistan, and that I think is an important way to look at all of these things. So what actually gets lost in the course of a cataclysmic event like the floods? People get displaced. About 99 million people more plunged back into poverty, loss of houses, loss of livelihoods, and it takes a long, long time to recover. So priority number one is a prevention part, the adaptation part, being able to support communities to actually make sure that in case something else happens, they are in fact in a better place. Much of the housing that is going up now, mostly in Sindh, but also in Baluchistan, although that is late as well, is about flood-resilient housing. People no longer, in many cases, need to leave and go away for 2 years. Maybe they can stay in their homes. I think that's important. Secondly, their livelihoods. Everyone is talking about agriculture, how everything gets washed away, or other simple things, small and micro businesses. That's what we focused on, and many others, after the flood. These small businesses, people cannot wait 1 or 2 years to recover livelihoods.
Yeah.
Services, infrastructure, education has been one of the focal areas for us. Within the UN system, there are partners like UNICEF that focus on the soft component, capacity support, teachers, curricula, etc. And we focused our attention on school rehabilitation, particularly girls' schools. And we really appreciate all of the partners that actually contributed to this. Health facilities, same thing. So identifiable sectors to build the resilience of before a flood and to quickly recover after the flood to bring back normalcy, I think is really quite important and clear. There's another area that I want to mention now along the same lines that we discussed earlier, which is it's a matter of when, not a matter of if. It's the risk insurance part.
Yeah.
A lot of the discussions over the last year, especially after the flood, but for about a year and up to now, is around the insurance sector, private sector in many cases, and whether there is an ability to insure the most vulnerable here, whether it's their home, whether it's them individually, whether it's their crops, their agriculture, their business, etc. Pakistan is in a difficult position, including compared to its neighbors, of having only 1% of its GDP insured, or the scale of it is 1% of GDP. This is very, very low. For a country where we talk about significant risks, that is a very, very low number. That's why the question of risk insurance, disaster risk insurance, and finance is really quite critical. Ourselves, with the Ministry of Climate Change, with the insurance sector, and actually as we speak and over the next few days, are working with the Global Shield against disaster
I think Pakistan's also put up a request as well.
Pakistan has put a request. It's one of the first moving countries. The in-country process is concluded. The ministry has already sent the request. And I think that's another important source that people often don't think about. When we think about development finance, climate finance, it's always grants, it's loans, it's private sector investment, but we cannot neglect the insurance part. It is inconceivable to me that a country as vulnerable as here would not pay more attention to this. The process from the last year actually puts quite a lot of attention on this as well. This is a policy discussion. It's a decision that needs to be made, and it is a sense that premiums need to be found to be able to cover folks who, mind you, Pakistan is also around 40% poor, according to the World Bank and others, who, when people prioritize where to put their money, if you're in that level of poverty, it will not be insurance. It's going to be for a job, putting food on the table, etc. The most vulnerable in this country need that kind of risk insurance.
It's very useful to see the entire thinking process, that the sectors that need resilience are those that should be enabling the population to return quickly, resume their livelihoods, and also from a future perspective link it to insurance so that even what losses happen can be recovered in the immediate term.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for that information, and I think it's useful to understand that this is the thinking that the UN is taking and also what the government is trying to embody as well. So thank you for joining us, and appreciate your time to give the feedback and comments as well.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
Stay tuned for more.